Pro Savings Days are on at Lowe's. Get up to 35% off select major appliances. Plus, My Lowe's Pro Rewards members get an additional 5% off when you buy 5 or more select GE, Whirlpool, and Electrolux kitchen or laundry major appliances. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 123. Discount valid to My Lowe's Pro Rewards members only. Exclusions and other restrictions apply. Selection varies by location while supplies last. See associate or Lowe's.com for details. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Visit Lowe's.com/terms for details. Subject to change.
Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going, as I like to point out each and every day, expands our base. This is an interesting morning in the news. Why? First, the United States Senate voted not to pursue a war powers resolution on the Venezuelan situation. The vote was 51-50. Wait a minute. There are 100 members of the U.S. Senate. So how is it 51-50? The answer is that Vice President Vance was brought in to break the tie. And why was there a tie? Because two Republican senators who were clear that they were going to vote for this resolution, Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri, and Todd Young, the Republican from Indiana, withdrew their support for the resolution at the last moment. Why? Because of White House pressure. Let's be clear. There will be no restraint in terms of what the Senate does or does not do on this president. And what's interesting is, even if the resolution had passed by one vote, by two votes, by whatever number of votes would have been, Donald Trump would have ignored it, because Donald Trump asserts that he has the power as president to act. And let me point out that although you can retroactively pass a resolution, once the action is taken, that's it. So I want everyone to remember this 51-50 vote, blocking a Venezuela negative vote on the actions taken. I want you to remember that the Republicans did not come through again. There is more. There is Iran. The question of what to do with Iran. Now, Donald Trump spoke of being ready to move, locked and loaded, he said. But now it turns out, through back channels, Donald Trump is trying to avoid a direct confrontation with Iran. This is a very interesting move, and of course, the Iranians did not proceed with executions because of the threat that Donald Trump raised. But here's the question. What happens tomorrow? And what happens when a president says, if you kill people indiscriminately, we will respond, and then he doesn't? Because that is exactly what happened in Iran. Now, there's a lot of discussion of what comes after the mullahs. The Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, has offered to be a transitional figure. By the way, a lot of people for it, a lot of people against it, but there is no organized opposition in Iran. And unlike the revolution of 1979, there is no Ayatollah Khomeini who can step in and be a leader. Even Pahlavi says that he wants to be a transitional figure. But is that what you need when you're overthrowing the mullahs? It's an interesting question, and I do not have an answer, except to say that Iran is not off the table. And what happens, Mr. President, when Iran proceeds with its crackdown, when those who have been spared execution or hanging are actually executed and hung? How do we respond? We don't know. We really don't. And it's a good question for everyone to ask and debate. There is yet another major issue which needs to be discussed. Greenland. That's right. We're back to Greenland. The talks yesterday did not go particularly well. And the U.S. has said that whether Greenland or Denmark likes it or not, we're going to proceed. This is a fascinating standoff, but something happened that has not received the notice that it ought to receive, and that is that nations in Europe are now sending troops to Greenland. It's symbolic, but France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Norway, and Sweden have all now sent troops to Greenland. Why? Because they want to make clear to the United States and to the world that they will not allow the United States to seize territory. It's a fascinating standoff, and Donald Trump must not be very happy about it. But remember, the United States signed an agreement with Greenland and with Denmark, which allows the United States to put any base or troops that they want into Greenland. This is a manufactured crisis. If there were a real danger, we can put all the troops into Greenland we want by treaty. And Denmark agrees. So what is the crisis? The crisis is about Donald Trump, who believes that we should seize Greenland, that it should become part of the United States of America. I want to simply say this issue is not going to be resolved easily, in part because of Donald Trump's rhetoric, and in part because, obviously, NATO, the Europeans, and Greenland want to resist any change of ownership. Now, I want to deal with a domestic issue, which I think is quite critical. Donald Trump is threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act. Why? He's threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act because of what's happening in Minnesota. And that brings me to ICE. There are more ICE troops in Minnesota than there are policemen in Minneapolis and St. Paul combined. And there is a question. What is the threat that exists in Minnesota? Do you stop and think about why the president is so adamant about this? And more so, why do you think there is such resistance in Minnesota to placing ICE in the center of the action? Well, we better understand one thing. Minnesota is not in danger of any action which would necessitate an Insurrection Act. We need to point out that the reason there are tensions on the streets of Minnesota is because Donald Trump has put ICE agents in, theoretically, to prevent fraud among Somalis, and he singles out Somalis, as you know, and also to prevent graft and corruption. Well, that's why we have U.S. attorneys in Minnesota and in all the states of the Union. If there were graft and corruption, it is those lawyers who work as U.S. attorneys to make the case against corruption. The idea of invoking the Insurrection Act, to me, is very bad news. And when Trump keeps talking about it, it scares me even more. Because the Insurrection Act was not designed to have an invasion of a state of the United States. This is something we better think about, because what Donald Trump has done is to occupy, to invade and occupy Minnesota. Did you know that Minnesota was enemy territory? I talked to an old friend of mine in Minneapolis and asked the question, what in the world is going on? And his answer was, we wish we could understand what it is that Donald Trump is doing. The idea that Minnesota is being singled out, and the idea that the Insurrection Act is being threatened by the President of the United States should disturb every American. Mr. President, that is not what the Insurrection Act was all about. But there is more that needs to be discussed. Last night, I was listening to my radio, and there was discussion about Donald Trump's enemies list. Evidently, there is an actual enemies list, and Donald Trump is going after his perceived political enemies. The question I want to pose to you is, do you want a president who has an enemies list? Do you? And should, for instance, Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles, be on such an enemies list? And how do you feel when you know that the White House is pursuing its political enemies by using the Justice Department, that's right, the Department of Justice, to pursue perceived political enemies? What bothers me is the misuse of presidential power. The idea that a president of the United States could talk about going after enemies and there is no outcry against him. I want you to note that at least 6 members of the federal task force attorneys in Minnesota have resigned. Why did they resign? They resigned because they view what Donald Trump is doing as just plain wrong. Because what is Donald Trump doing? He is weaponizing the Department of Justice. He is weaponizing U.S. attorneys' offices. And when 6 U.S. attorneys resign in protest over what is happening, that should raise every red flag dealing with American democracy. The fact of the matter is that when Donald Trump uses the power of the presidency in this fashion, when he threatens to invoke the 19th century Insurrection Act in order to get what he wants, everyone should be concerned. And of course, there is the challenge which is put forth about sanctuary cities. And the Republicans and Donald Trump have argued that perhaps the best thing to do would be to eliminate sanctuary cities, and that might diffuse the situation. Here in Northern California, where I sit, San Francisco and Oakland and Berkeley and other cities are sanctuary cities. Let me tell you, it has not disrupted who we are. It has not disrupted the pace of life in San Francisco and beyond. It has not made us unsafe. And that, my friends, is the real concern that I have. I received an email from a listener who asked me a simple question. Why didn't Donald Trump deploy National Guard to San Francisco? After all, San Francisco is a sanctuary city. And the answer is that key people who have supported Donald Trump, including Mark Benioff, have indicated to him, don't send the Guard into San Francisco. It was a decision made by who talked to Donald Trump. Let me assure you of one thing. When you have a president of the United States who has an enemies list, who threatens to invoke the Insurrection Act, when you have Republicans in the United States Senate who refuse to vote to limit the president's war-making power, even though the resolution itself would have virtually no authority, when you have United States senators like Josh Hawley and Todd Young backing down under threat from the White House, my friends, we have a problem. And when you have a president of the United States who continues to talk about seizing Greenland, whether they like it or not, when you have European countries putting troops into Greenland from France, Germany, United Kingdom, Norway, and Sweden, as an act of saying, no, Mr. President, you cannot do these things, it tells you something. It tells you about the arrogance of power. And make no mistake, when a president of the United States puts together an enemies list, when he pursues his political opponents through the vehicle of the Department of Justice. We have a serious matter on our hands. This is no joke. This is American democracy being threatened. This is proof positive of the fragility of our political system, indeed of the Constitution itself. My friends, the time has come for people to understand that the excessive abuse of power by Donald Trump in foreign policy and domestic policy proves proof positive that who is president matters. And how we respond to Donald Trump and his administration may affect the course of American democracy for years to come. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. You can write a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify, click any of the links to the show notes to connect with me on social media. Remember, please, the most important thing for all of us is to share this episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which, of course, is our goal. It is important to note that this show has been getting so much positive attention that we're now having advertising support. And I must tell you, that is very gratifying. I want to say a special word of thanks to Gogo Zoger, the wonderful producer of this podcast. Without Gogo, well, I don't know where I'd be. So Gogo, thanks very much. And to all of you, we're going to watch today as the news breaks. What will happen? How will things proceed? And the good news is that I'll be back here tomorrow with you on Around the Political World with John Rothman to talk with you more about what's going on. See you tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.